back to another lecture on the course Python Fundamentals Building Blocks for Aspiring Developers. In this lecture, we will start with the fourth module that is about functions. So, this is our agenda for this module. Again, we have divided it into 4 days. Um, in the first day for this module, we will learn about what functions are, how to define and call them. Then we will look about different arguments of the functions. Then we will learn about the scope of different variables, and then we'll move a bit advanced to see what are lambda functions and how they are used. So let's begin our day defining functions. So first of all, what are functions? So functions are basically blocks of reusable code that we can write by ourselves to perform certain tasks. So we write a piece of code. We want to use that piece of code again and again. Instead of writing those lines of code again and again, we define a function and use the function to perform that task. So it is also used to break down the code into smaller parts or modules. Now this will be much more clear when we actually start coding, and it makes the code more organized, readable, and easier to maintain. Now if you look at the image on the right side, you will see a visualization of how a function is. So let's say if you think of a function like in mathematics, um, what actually a function is that you give it some input and it gives you an output after performing some operations or anything after doing something with the input. So let's say a function is something right there. You give an input, it does something and gets you an output. It's just as simple as that. So let's say x is the input, we give a value x as input, it does something, maybe adds it, maybe um, subtracts it, maybe uses equation and just returns us the value of that answer, that is y. Now when we are using functions, if you're using predefined functions, then you do not need to know what is happening inside. You're just concerned with what input you give and what output you get. That's all. So moving on, this is how we define functions. So functions are defined using the def keyword in Python, and after that we write the name of the function. These are obviously custom functions that we define ourselves. We can write whatever code we want in the function. So in the parentheses, we can give it any arguments or parameters, and then we write the body of the function. So it is first, let's understand the difference between two terms, that is parameters and arguments. So parameters are basically whatever we do, whatever we define in the function definition, and arguments are whatever we use when we call the functions. So these are two different terminologies. This will be much more clear when we move on to the part of actually implementing arguments, but just for now. Obviously, these are mostly used interchangeably. So I mean, you will get the point if I use either of those. So moving on. So this is how a typical definition of a function looks like in Python. So we have the def keyword, then we have a space, and then we have the name of the function, that is greet. We can name it anything that we want, but again, it's a good practice to name the function of what the function is actually doing. So it is easier to spot in the code. And then we are writing the body of the function. Now the body of the function is whatever functionality or task we want to do within the function. So if you go back to this example, I told you that we are not concerned with what is in the function. That is when we are using the functions. When we are defining the functions, we need to define what we need to do. Then we give it an input and we get an output. So once we define the function, then we get to this part where we are not concerned about what is happening in the function. But first, we have to define the function of what it is actually doing. And now, once we have defined a function, we say, okay, this is a function. It does this, this, and this. So, okay, now what do I do? So then we use the function. So we use the function only after it has been defined. Now that makes logical sense. If something is not defined, how can I use it? So we can only use the function after it has already been defined in Python. So how do I use this? I just use the name of the functions, name of the function with the parentheses to call it. So the parentheses are these brackets. So these are empty. I just use it like this and the function is called. So let's start coding. So I'll come over here. I'll just create a new file. Previous one is empty, but still I will say it module 4.py. Just close this one. Yeah. So let's say I want to do print hello. That's great. Okay. And if I run the code, let me just clear this for now. And if I run the code like this, so it says hello, that's great. Now let's say I want to print this 5 times at different places. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to write this line of code again and again. So that is not feasible. See, why do I need to write it again and again when it is the same exact line? That is where functions come into play. So what I do is that I say def, then name of the function, and then we have parentheses. We're keeping it empty for now, colon, and then we hit enter, and now we are in the body of the function. Now in this body of the function, what I can do is that I can write print. In fact, I can just copy paste this from here. I will just remove this one. And I say, okay, this is here. Okay. So if I save it, you see we have no output here. Why? Because we have just defined the function. We have not called the function. We have not used the function. It has just been defined. So what I say is that now I say greet like this, and I now run the code. It says, hello, that's great. So now when I use this here, it says, okay, greet, this is a function. It goes here and says, now I need to start executing the body of the function. So the body of the function is this, and then it prints this one, and that's over. And now it continues with the rest of the code. Now let's say I want to print this 5 times. So I say greet, 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 and greet. Run the code. It's printed 5 times. No problem. You see how writing this was easy rather than writing this. Now this is a much simpler example, but let's say I had maybe 5 more things. Print, let's say, hello, your name is, let's say, in fact, let's say, hello, that's great. I love Python too. Do you love Python too? And print Python is easy, right? Python is easy, right? So, so let's say this is a, let's say I want to write these 5 things after every input. So let's say I have an input name 1 is equals to input and say what is your name, and I do this. Yeah, we have an input. So let's say what I want to do is that after getting an input of the name, I want to say print. In fact, let's just print the name, and then I want to write these 5 things. So let's say this is a robot, and whenever a person enters a name, it has to say these 5 lines every time. So what I'm going to do is that I'm not going to write it like this every time. Let's say it asks for names of 3 people. So I do this, and then I copy this, paste it here. So now we have 3 inputs, right? So now I want to write this thing after each input. So it is very inefficient if I write these print statements. So what I do, I put that in a function and I just say greet. And then over here, I'll say greet, and I also need to print the name. So I say print name1, um, name2, and here I also say print name3, and here I say greet. So now if I run the code, so what is your name? So let's say I say John. It says John, hello, that's great. I love Python too. Everything else. Now it has moved on to the next code. So it again asks, what is your name? I say Harry. So it again greets that person with all these things. Now another person walks in. Robot says, what is your name? He says maybe Carl. Hit enter and it prints everything for that person too. So you see how easy it was to put all this thing in a function instead of writing it again and again here after each line. So this is basically the usage of function. This is a very simple example, but it can get way more complex. Now let's talk about how it makes the code more easy to maintain, easy to read, and so on. So now let's say someone shares this code with you and you want to make some changes to the greeting. So instead of, so let's say if it was written, everything was written like this, here and here and here, you wanted to say, um, you do not want to say Python is easy. You want to say Python is easy to learn. Now instead of um, now you need to make the change everywhere. You need to make the change here. You need to make the change here. That is not so good. So we get rid of this. We get rid of this. We get rid of this. We just make the change in our function. Okay. So I hit run the code. We say my name is John. Now you see the changes there. Now I say my name is Harry. The name is here. I say my name is Carl. The changes here. You see how it was, how easy it was to make the change. We just made the change once and it reflected everywhere in the code where we were using this. So this is how it makes it easy. So you can have, whenever writing algorithms, you can have different parts of your algorithm as different functions. So if you need to change the algorithm or something in one part, you just need to change that in the function and it will reflect everywhere. Now another thing to know about functions is that functions exist. Let me just do it like this for now, like this. Yeah. So functions already exist in Python by default. There are some default functions. For example, when I do print, this is itself a function. It doesn't matter if I put a space here or not. So if I do a print, this is a function. You see, it is the same syntax. Name and then parenthesis, name and then parenthesis. Now we say this, hello. So this is a bit, this we will cover in the next lecture, why we put something within the parentheses, but you see this is a function, that's all. Now if I do not define a function, let's say I do not have a function and and I'm trying to call it. It says great is not defined. What is great? It doesn't know. Now if I call the function here before defining the function in Python, so like this, it again says name greet is not defined. This is because Python runs line by line, first line, second line, third line, and so on. So it is important to always define the function before you are going to use it. You cannot use the function here before defining it. So it has to be the correct order. So this is why general practice is that if you have any functions, you define it right at the top. So let's say you have two more functions, greet, or let's say buy, and I say and buy, then there's another function and there's another function here. another function here, another function here, and then I can start coding and just use it. So this will just make sure that all the functions have been defined in the start. So that's just good coding practice. So that was all in this lecture. Hopefully you learned about functions and you can see how useful they are in the code. Keep on practicing these and start to create some scenarios and solve them using functions. So that was all in this lecture. We will meet you in the next one with some more information on functions. Up till then, goodbye.